Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahul Verma. I work here at the Center for Policy Research. Apologies for this late start. I'm very happy to see all of you, especially, we had promised that in the 50th year of CPR, we'll be doing lots of things. But our 50th year has become much more exciting than we anticipated and hoped for. And so other than what we are supposed to do, which is research, we've been doing many more things, if you know what I mean by that. But so there is, of course, an instrumental reason to do this. It's like the series of conversations on Indian elections, how India votes. The instrumental reason is to get all of you here to meet friends and talk and celebrate our 50th year in style. But there's also an intellectual reason to do this. And the intellectual reason is following that even us at CPR, when we used to do this election-related events, they mostly happen either just before the election or just after the election. And so most of our conversation then gets occupied by the immediate factors, what is shaping the election and what shaped the election outcome. And we have not been actually spending time in thinking, like slow and serious thinking about how India votes, how Indians participate in elections. And I think this question is important because someone who studies elections and voting behavior, I'm always confused by what Indian elections are about and how Indian voters behave. And the reason is this, that people who, you will always hear two kinds of voices. One is elections are very, very complex in India, yet everyone has lots of things to tell you about election. Right. And similarly, while people will argue that or say that Indian voters are sophisticated and they think a lot about how to vote, but in all our analysis, we reduce voting behavior to just a couple of factors. You know the caste of the person and you will assume how that person is going to vote. And then most of the analysis also gets reduced to whether people received all kinds of gifts, which includes samosas, saris, liquor, and all kinds of those things. So if voters are sophisticated, then how could all the analysis be reduced to just these two factors? And if elections are that complex, then how everyone can talk about elections as if they have done not a PhD, but like they know everything about it. And so I thought just to start this conversation with two people who have decades of experience studying elections from very different vantage point, Rajdeep Sardesai and Pradeep Chibbar. Rajdeep is consulting editor at India Today. He has written many books, both on politics as well as on cricket. He's one of the regular commentators on elections and voting behavior. Pradeep Chibbar is Indo-American Chair Professor of India Studies at University of California, Berkeley. Pradeep has also written many books on Indian party system and Indian elections. Several papers on this. Both of them have been writing and talking and debating about some, or perhaps thinking about some of these things. So what I want them to do in like their first 7 to 8 minutes of opening remark, to talk about what we have learned or not learned about Indian elections. Are they actually simple and easy to comprehend, or we have no idea about how to study elections, what we have missed? And so going forward, how should we be studying elections? Pradeep from an academic vantage point and Rajdeep as a journalist, and how both of their communities have been studying this enterprise of elections in India. So I'll start with Pradeep and then with Rajdeep, and then we'll have a moderated conversation for 15-20 minutes, and then I'll open the house for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you. I completely concur with listening to election out. Really, it's like listening to something that the sun or whatever. Slightly different than what and we haven't learned. It's like what are the things talk about important things that we have missed. Directly said, how What do you with what happens, right? And let's be just hopefully they're all academics and its majority of the BJP is the single largest party, that is BJP by capital, right? All agree that of the first one of those two, right? I'm going to start with that premise. If that is the premise, and if you want Rahul and Rajdeep talk about Rajdeep even book on this, very clever way of me just Rahul Rajdeep will answer all the questions. It says that this which is the elections and the outcome. One explaining the success is the general that I think you wrote a whole book explaining why it's important. And what's interesting to me is all these decades in elections, after all these decades of having multiple live elections, we don't have a theory of how leadership influences elections in any way, shape, or form. Anytime an election outcome happens, what we do is we attribute it to leadership. It's Indira Gandhi, it's Narendra Modi, it's Jayalalitha, it's Mamta, it's NTR, it's Anna Durai. You know, what point of leadership is? Is it charisma? Is it a something to say trust? Is it storytelling? I don't know what it is, right? So it's a very generic word. So one of the first things we need to about since we have here a little bit less. Yeah. So I think we should think about what, right? That gets a leader to actually swing elections in such deep and fundamental ways. Because, and the reason that's important is because the leadership completely, the next thing, right? Which is, we all know, right, that in social divisions and social inequalities, this question becomes important is all of you have been observing Indian elections will know that the Modi of 2014 and the Modi of 2019 and even probably even 2024 present very different images. And if it's leadership that's driving the election, what is it about speed? He's talking to his articulating his vision has changed. And I think we need as academics to get an understanding and handle of leaders, especially in national leaders, in elections. Because the one thing we have come to agree on, which is one thing we have for all these years, is that elections can now be separated from state elections. National elections are not a national rhythm. So the question is the prime minister only speaking. What is it? What is it that's driving these elections, and why is it that leaders becomes important, and why is it that the prime minister has become such a focal point of studying in elections or in the mind of the voter, if that's even true? I think think about. The other thing I think we've done a pretty good job at, just to focus on what Rahul was saying, which is we can by and large say that the survey data has done one thing. We can by and large say, and survey data pretty much, good evidence on this. There are certain caste that vote for. You can think about that even if you think of UP, which is the archetypical case, this is something Rahul pointed out to me at a talk I gave a couple of days ago at the still Nehru Memorial Museum and Laboratory, where essentially that going on. They explain and the Muslims, that's 40–50% of the vote. What about the others? Where are they going? How are they voting? And the reason Rahul has seen these, is that what we people, there's a lot, in fact, quality the national level volatility calculated by people stands at about 25. Votes being third, I can get the data. For villages, 3. And that's a very high number, which means that even in a based on cost these swings. And then that gets us to the observation even on caste and caste, religion, and the links to politics. Pretty straightforward. If you look at it in upper caste, vote for the B, right? We can establish that. But the upper caste did not always vote. And they voted for other parties. And the question is, why have they swung? Why have they swung to the BJP? And you'll find this in numerous castes across India. They've actually changed their votes. They've moved from one party to the other. So I think it's time for us as academics, if we have the time and the energy and the resources, to actually figure out, collect from our data and our sources, we can do this, which is all the castes, which castes have swung their allegiance, why and for what reasons historically. Right? And maybe we'll then get a better sense of what is it that attracts the upper caste to the BJP today, right? Rather than just saying, reflexively assuming that this is what's going on. I think we can actually build that data set if people want, or do this overtime analysis. So that's the other thing. So the harder questions, which I think, so those are the two things which I want to just start with to explain outcomes. One is we should focus on leadership. The other is we should reassess caste, religion, linkages to political parties. Though some relationships are robust, we should ask ourselves why that's the case. Because and the third thing I think we need to do, explain local level volatility. Why is it that local elections national elections at the village level are extremely volatile? And in fact, I should have shown this to Rajdeep, he would have loved it. So we plotted the BJP vote in 2014 against the BJP vote in 2019. And there's a large cloud of data. There are places where the BJP did really poorly in 2014, polling booths did really well in 2019, and there are places that did really well in 2014 and did really poorly in 2019. So in other words, even for the party that won so handily in UP, right, there's enormous local level volatility. And the question is what explains that? And I don't think we have any clues, and my co-author and I have no clues either. We'll come up with something, but we don't have any good ideas. I think the places where we are really weak, and I think there are only Sri is here and he's done some great work on this, Sridharan, which is we have the one thing I'll just say two more things quickly. One is I think we've left gender out of the analysis completely. When you think of the analysis, when you think of all these analyses, it's caste and women are included just as, are they voting more or are they voting less? Right? And that's about it. We have no deep theorizing of how gender actually, and gender is really subsumed into social categories as if it is a category that has no meaning, and that women's experiences are the same as men in all these various castes. And, there are all kinds of reasons to doubt that. The things I think where we had know very, very little. Right? So these are things we know something about. Things we know very little are about our theorizing campaigns, how parties are financed, right? Sri has done some work on this. How tickets are allocated, again, Sri has done some great work on this, and how party organizations work, especially locally. We have some idea of how parties work nationally, but at the local level, we have very little evidence. So if you think of elections not only as outcomes, but as how is a campaign set up? So what is the role of social media? We all know social media matters, but I haven't seen any good systematic study that says whom does social media matter for? How does it matter and what's going on? People use Twitter to explain outcomes, but I haven't seen. Maybe there is this WhatsApp University, or presumably, but the question is who is watching it? Who is reading it? right? And are they the true believers or are they the people who are not the true believers? I'll be done in a minute. More voice. Okay, excellent. I'm completely lost. Okay. So that's the first thing. The other thing, of course, is we need to think about party organizations, because elections are run by political parties. They're not run by, some random organization. They're run by political parties. And we need to know how these parties are organized, how they finance themselves, how they set up tickets, and how they're organized locally, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about, we know a little bit about leadership, but we need to know more. We know a little bit about social divisions, but our analysis, I think, is weak. We left gender out completely. We can't explain volatility at the local level. We have no reason, we have no explanations for why that should be happening. And that is indeed a fact that's happening. That we know something about, and the volatility we know very little about. And what's interesting is we just talk about it without thinking about it systematically. And then as far as theorizing campaigns goes, financing of elections, organization of tickets and party organization, we know, we just have anecdotes. We don't have any good evidence. So we can't really study elections without knowing how these parties are actually doing what they're doing in a much more deep and systematic way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pradeep.
You can have all three.
No, thanks. Doesn't have to come in the middle. It has to?
Yes, you can take that also.
No, it seems to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chipper. Thank you, Rahul. And thank you for having me here. Journalists tend to get overawed when surrounded by academics. And therefore, when Rahul first told me to do this, I was wondering why me, honestly. And the existential crisis worsened with what has happened in Maharashtra in the last few days. It's a state which, I thought I knew, and then I find everything there. I mean, which academic, with all that you put in, could understand, could make sense of all that's happened in Maharashtra in the last, 48 months. I keep telling this story to friends that when I first joined journalism in '88, this senior journalist tells me the one state that you really don't want to be a journalist in as a political journalist is Maharashtra, because nothing ever happens here. It's usually Congress versus Congress. And if you look at Indian politics, for the longest time, Maharashtra was relatively the most stable state. It was seen as essentially a Congress, almost hegemonic state. If you look at the manner in which it dominated elections in Maharashtra. Now you've got a situation where it's completely, the entire state seems ruptured, and its politics seems to have been totally broken, if one can use that word, because there is absolutely no ideological alignments or even party alignments left. I was just asking someone this morning in Mumbai, where I was, how many of the sitting MLAs in that Maharashtra Assembly of 288 have actually been in more than one party over the last 15 years? And we were just calculating sitting on Marine Drive, and he's a MLA who switched twice. And he said that it's almost 1/3 is what we came up with. Roughly around 1/3 of Maharashtra's MLAs. Jill will probably find it fascinating to look at just the number of MLAs who've switched sides in Maharashtra over the last 3 elections. And then that makes it extremely difficult to make any sense of it. What Rahul had asked me to talk about was to just look at the way journalists cover elections. I'm not going to go into outcomes. I'm happy to discuss that if anyone throws a question. As to how I see 2024 panning out. But sometimes, you should always get out of that when you're on top of it. Having got a few elections right, might as well not discuss, because it will be held against me at some later date that you said at CPR on July 7th or July 6th, 2023 that, Mr. Modi was winning. What happened? How did he lose? I'm not saying he's losing, for God's sake. Let me at the outset say it's actually my belief that election coverage is one of the few areas in contemporary journalism where in scope, if not in depth of knowledge, the coverage is actually improved. You just need to compare the coverage of the 1977 election, the sort of landmark election, the defining election, with more recent elections over the last 20 years. And I do believe you will find far better coverage, both granular and macro, than was the case then. I mean, that can be partly explained due to the greater resources available today, due to better use of technology, due to the involvement of academics who sort of cross-pollinate journalism for a change. And also the fact, interestingly, that the news media and the same news media, which doesn't invest enough in news gathering in general, is actually more willing to invest in news gathering during election time, whether it's more detailed analysis, whether it's the kind of polls, getting into real data gathering of a kind that never happened 20, 25 years ago. I also do think that some of the issues that the media tackles during election time actually throw sunshine on potential areas of darkness that otherwise don't get touched. I recall, for example, a wonderful series that Indian Express did ahead of the 2004 elections, where they got all their reporters to crisscross Mr. Vajpayee's golden quadrilateral at the time. And actually, it gave us a sense of how people outside the big cities were looking at the elections. And for the first time, amidst the propaganda of India shining, you got a sense that there could be areas of darkness out there. In more recent times, problems like the stray cattle menace in Uttar Pradesh and how it will reflect in political or voting behavior in UP, or more recently, the old pension scheme, and why that old pension scheme has had such a strong reaction, as we saw in the state of Himachal Pradesh, or indeed the most recent election where the price of LPG in Karnataka suddenly became an election issue. I mean, who would have thought that the Congress party in Bengaluru would actually hold a press conference with the LPG gas cylinder in the backdrop of every press conference? And frankly, for me, perhaps, spending far too much time in noisy debates in TV studios, I will not forget that, honestly, I really thought that it was a wake-up call. I'm sitting in this village near Belgaum, and there is, and luckily people in Belgaum, speak a bit of Marathi and not just Kannada, but I approached her thinking she was a Lingayat because she was outside a Lingayat temple. Turned out she was a Madiga, a Dalit community, and she just lit into this whole LPG issue. And she was so coherent while she lit into it as to why she would vote for Siddaramaiah and not out, Siddaramaiah, yes, but Congress or Siddaramaiah actually. Why would she vote for Siddaramaiah and not for the BJP in this election? Only because the price of an LPG cylinder was now 1150 versus 400 or 500 that it was in Siddaramaiah's time. And the fact that the Annabhagya scheme, she said, had been far more effective during the Congress regime between 2013 and 18 than between the BJP. Now, you're sitting in a TV studio, you're never going to get a sense of that because you're going to have the typically hyper-polarized debate between two people who sort of, shout at each other, but you'll never listen to those voices. So I think election, strangely enough, actually forces us to listen to voices other than our own, and also voices of real people in a sense, and not the people who sort of come with their study, the propaganda sheeters in a television studio. To that extent, I would actually say most news networks, both TV, print certainly, and to some extent digital, have actually come across relatively well in recent times at election time. It's one of the few things where you would actually give them a pass grade. That's the good news. The not so good news is the hyper-partisanship that we see almost on a daily basis today, especially in mainstream media, does get accentuated at election time. And we've seen in recent times that ruling parties, and in particular the BJP at the center in the last 8 years, gets disproportionate coverage. I can't recall a single election where if you just looked at mainstream media, you wouldn't believe that the BJP is winning. In every election, the general mahal that is created is it's only a race for not just the BJP winning, but it's a question of how much will they win by. In 2019, for example, the research from the television audience meter agencies showed that Mr. Modi got 4 times more coverage than the entire opposition put together. And most of that coverage, dare I say, was breathlessly effusive rather than being interrogating or even questioning. And in state elections too, the ruling parties of their respective states tend to get more coverage than the opposition. This to some extent is linked to the phenomenon of paid news, or the cancer of paid news that now really sort of courses through the entire media. When governments with large advertising budgets open their purse strings, it does seriously compromise news coverage. And you have individual candidates now buying space both on TV and print. This is again as true for national and regional networks. In fact, regional networks I find are even more dependent on government advertising. It was very interesting that in Karnataka, on the Sunday before the election polling, the Prime Minister addressed a rally in somewhere, I think in Kolar, and the same speech was repeated across the top 3 leading channels of Karnataka from morning to evening. When I asked why, I was told by one of the channel persons that the BJP had bought that airtime. That they had said they had decided to carpet bomb the state, and from 7 in the morning till 7 in the night, all you are going to do is the same speech, not a new speech. The same speech will get repeated of Prime Minister Modi. It's not just Mr. Modi. You know, one of the things in Karnataka, it was almost as close to a level playing field because the other side also had resources. But the fact is, if the Prime Minister is to address 4 rallies in the run-up to any election, all 4 rallies will be shown live, while the opposition party's rally will probably be shown only with edited excerpts. And then that hardly makes it a level playing field. So the major concern I think that we have to look at leading up to 2024 is how do you ensure a level playing field at election time in a hyper-polarized news environment? How can the news media contribute to at least giving a sense of diverse voices, of multiple voices? 2 issues that also need to be flagged off, particularly on TV. It's obsessively event-driven and soundbite-driven. I call it the Ionization of news. I used to call it the McDonaldization of news in terms of the fact that the soundbites seem to matter more than anything else, but it's actually the Ionization of news, where a news wire like ANI will get a soundbite early morning from a relatively nondescript party spokesperson, and that will set the narrative for the entire day. As a result, diversity of informed opinion is sadly absent on most news channels. Moreover, the focus in that news cycle is on individuals and not on the process. In that sense, the multimedia machine of our times has contributed to one of the points that Professor Chipper raised, which is leadership building up this personality cult at election time. You know, we are looking at the time Modi versus who? You know, it's 543 seats across India. Most people today, most journalists will not be able to tell you the names of even 30 or 35 of our MPs. But they will know, you know, it's Mr. Modi versus who. So you have effectively made an election through this use of this mighty media machine into a personality context, a presidential style contest in a parliamentary democracy. It also means that we often miss the wood for the trees and then fail to explain not just who is winning, but more importantly and crucially for many of us here, why is that person winning? For example, I think ahead of the 2019 election, one of the things that many people missed was the rise of the BJP's Labharti voter. The fact that this large pool of beneficiaries had been created who in some way or the other had benefited and then been connected by the government and convinced by the government that those benefits had come because of the votes they would give to a particular party. Maybe it's our own biases in a way that prevent us from seeing this, but this was a reality that existed on the ground. But it's also partly because of the nature of real-time news, where you hurtle from one story to another and where today's breaking news is the next hour's history. I mean, this is the way the news cycle operates. And what it does, therefore, is there is less time to pause and reflect, and the constant surround sound is built around headline or event management. That takes away from the core news. I mean, one of the classic images of that 2019 elections is that of Prime Minister Modi at Kedarnath in a cave, even after the campaign time was officially over. I mean, it also shows how the election commissions, plays rather loose with rules when it comes to election time, but it also shows the astuteness of a politician that he is going to use every available weapon at his disposal to work on the minds of voters till the very last moment. And because television is driven by the visual image, that image of the Prime Minister there at Kedarnath virtually becomes a sort of domineering image across television screens. As a result, I think we are all trapped in a way in hyperpolarization, where we mirror our biases, prejudices, and lack nuance or objectivity. The other threat, dare I say, is what I call the WhatsAppization and the hashtagization of news. Hashtagification. This is a threat at normal times, but it gets heightened, I believe, at election time at the moment, because news channels are increasing the influence, particularly TV and to a large extent digital media also. Digital media today likes to take the moral high ground. But what is this moral high ground that digital? It's all opinion driven. Digital media, to my mind, is even more polarized than TV media is at the moment. And you're driven again by what will say, you're driven by making, I'm looking at the analysis of Maharashtra. People who've never been to that state are sitting and pontificating on it simply because they would either want to be on the one side or the other of the fence. It's not based on any ground journalism anymore. And more importantly, it's driven by what trends, how a WhatsApp group can be manipulated. So the politicians do it. One of the fascinating aspects of recent elections is just how WhatsApp is being used by every political party right down to the booth level. There are people professionally now hired just to do that. So actually an opportunity that I believe exists for many people here is to be great fact checkers at election time, to be able to, in a way, bust this propaganda that comes through these hashtag trends, through WhatsApp groups, and fact check all parties, not only the party which you don't like. You need to fact check each and every party, each and every leader. The final piece of good news, even where a party, okay, so that's the bad news. The final piece of good news is even where a party or an individual monopolizes the airwaves, buys news space, it doesn't guarantee victory in Indian elections. And we saw this in Karnataka this time. In the last week of that campaign, the Prime Minister was all over every Kannada channel, and yet it didn't decide the final result. A Mayawati-like leaders on the other side of the fence, she's contemptuous of the media and always has been, virtually refuses to give interviews. And yet that didn't stop her from winning a majority in UP in 2007. Jayalalitha was reluctant to give any interview through a long career in politics. She routinely won in Tamil Nadu. So net, I think media management of the kind that we are seeing, and we're going to see it in with even greater, I believe, with even greater vigor ahead of 2024, is necessary, but not sufficient. You can rig poll findings, you can even manipulate the coverage, but you can even influence the narrative. But the good news, and the only good news at the end of the day, is you can't fix the voter yet. The voter has still got this remarkable capacity to sort of surprise you. And one of the surprises we are seeing, Pradeep just mentioned it on gender. This is my belief. You cannot win an Indian election today without having the majority woman vote. If there is one thing I'm seeing in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of talk about caste, which has, dominated in a way election analysis since 1991 and the rise of Mandal. A lot of analysis on Hindutva and its impact. The real factor that I see in Indian elections, show me an Indian election where the winning candidate has not got a majority of the woman vote. Mamata Banerjee was a great example in West Bengal 2 years ago. We spoke about the Hindu-Muslim division in West Bengal, but the real story was gender. She was almost double digit ahead of the BJP among women voters. And I saw it in Karnataka, the LPG election, as I call it. Just look at the gap in Karnataka this time, both in two key groups. One is Dalits, which I think the BJP should be worried about, Dalits and tribals. And the other group was gender, which I think is an aberration, because Narendra Modi's rise over the last 8 years is consistently where he's on the ticket, in the sense, and that's the center state distinction, where he's on the ticket, more women tend to vote for him than men. So I think the media could do much more in terms of focusing on this gender impact on Indian election outcomes.
Okay, thank you, Rajan. So let me ask you both a couple of questions and also reflect or ask you some of the things you have said. How many mics I need?
3 at least.
Tell me if,
no, it seems fun.
So I think you're absolutely right. Both of you are right about the gender story. That's the news story it's developing. And now there's also emerging research. And what has happened in Indian elections, BJP actually used to trail among women voters till 2014. In 2014, that gap closed. In 2019, BJP has slight advantage. And now the kind of advantage which Yogi Adityanath had in UP, among women voters in single-handedly basically shifted votes in the elections in their favor. So while we know that this is a developing story, we don't know much what is one leading to increased turnout among women, right? Because the gender gap in turnout has closed significantly. And if now women and men have started having very different voting preferences, what is driving? And that may be very different. Like in Karnataka, that may be very, very different. Like what factors that drove women voters towards Congress. In Assam and in UP, those factors might be very, very different. So I agree with you that we need more research. Where I'm slightly like, I agree with you, Pradeep, on the leadership. We don't know the factors, and Rajdeep on elections becoming presidential. What I don't know whether elections have become presidential now. Leaders have always remained important. Nehru used to carry the burden of Congress party in 60s. I don't think Congress would have won elections in 70s without Indira Gandhi trying to, emerge as a leader who could directly connect with voters. Vajpayee was very, very important for rise of BJP in 1990s. And at the state level, you can't imagine any state without like the Karunanidhis or Patnayaks or Sharad Pawars where you were there. So I don't think elections can ever be imagined without leaders in India. So like it's becoming presidential now. That's sort of like hard for me to digest. What I want to ask you both, so Pradeep, the question to you first is absolutely right that we actually don't know a lot about party organizations. We have given up on the study of party organizations, which used to happen in 60s and 70s. And perhaps many scholars, and this is where I want you to be advisors had, as you troubled me for many years, right, is how should we study party organizations? And the reason I'm asking, because party organizations in India are very, very opaque and close. It's very difficult to even study campaign finances. So just to give you an example, Melvin Hosier, I asked him to basically compare the expenditure report which parties submit to the Election Commission of India, right? And can we basically match over the years, where do parties spend money? Parties are so smart that they keep changing the category. Every year, the report which they submit to Election Commission of India. And in some year, the like 80% of the amount is in the miscellaneous category, right? And so you can't even match where they are spending. Are they spending on staff? Are they spending on office? Are they spending on poster? So even on the documents which they submit, ticket nomination is basically few people sitting in one room deciding who gets what. I don't know how we will ever get access to study something like this. So what's the way to, like, unless we figure out this organizational stuff, how factions are important, those kind of things, how will that help? Like, so what would be your suggestion to do this?
I think you should answer.
No. I'm looking at parties whose organizations seem to be melting away in front of our eyes.
Yes.
I mean, I think what has happened, I mean, very quickly, just a point. I just think because politics, and it could be linked to what you said about funding, but because politics appears to me as an observer to have become so transactional and completely devoid of ideology, increasingly. I'm not saying it's complete. I mean, it would be wrong to say that, the number of it was very interesting yesterday at where Sharad Pawar, I mean, just as an anecdotal experience, just where, there were two competing meetings as a trial of strength. And the trial of strength that the media focused upon was who had the more MLAs. What fascinated me was that the Karyakartas or the workers appeared particularly among Dalit, women and Muslims to be with Sharad Pawar. Because I think somewhere, I mean, this is potted, I know, but somewhere the BJP at the moment, because Ajit Pawar is aligned with the BJP, it meant that a number of the women, it meant that a number of the Muslim voters have gravitated, and the NCP has a large number of Muslim Karyakartas who gravitated to Sharad Pawar. The women, because Supriya Sule is the head of the women's wing, have gravitated towards Sharad Pawar. I was not sure why Dalits are, and I think one of the stories of the next 12 months will be this Dalit vote. Because the BJP has dominated that vote for the last 8-9 years. For the first time after 8-9 years, I am sensing both among Dalits and women a questioning of the BJP's politics in a manner that I don't see among our traditional middle-class Hindu North Indian men who seem to be the foot soldiers of the BJP's drive ahead. But, this is just, so, when an organization splinters, how do you then get a sense of which, how do you assess, or how do you sort of capture an organization, particularly because they're also opaque, and each of them has these individuals. One of the reasons why the NCP, I think, has broken the way it has is because each individual NCP MLA brings with him the entire network of that district, which includes particularly the cooperative network in Maharashtra. So they're all sort of mini, these sort of mini dons of their area, and therefore, like in Maharashtra and Karnataka, the two cash and carry states, as I call them now, you can just move from one party to the other and take your sort of voters and your influence along with you, which doesn't happen in too many other states at the moment.
So I don't have an answer to Rahul's question. It's like, how do you study a party organization? I feel like I'm in a PhD qualifying examination right now. I can't answer this, but let me just, put this up. This is the thought experiment. And, I'm just going to say something that will please Som sitting here, which is that maybe one way, and this is something I think we make a slip, and I'm going to just push Rajdeep a little bit on this, which is when the candidate moves, not only the candidate moves, and the candidate's influences, if you will, right, move with the candidate, maybe. It's not that the voters may necessarily move with the candidate. That's to be determined. We don't know that. And so the question there is, if you want to study party organization, one way to study this party organization is to study this locally, because the top level will remain opaque. Nobody is going to give you any access, and their internal documents are closed, and we know the horror stories of those as well. But I think one way to do it is to just think about places where there are, partisan elections versus places that are no partisan elections. And so I'm thinking of Kerala versus local elections which are partisan, clearly partisan versus places where local elections are not partisan. And what does that do to the local party organization and how these party organizations are being locally? So we can study this locally rather than studying this at the top level. Right? As you yourself said the other day in defending what I was trying to say, is that party offices at the local level are candidate offices. Right? And not to engage in a debate, but I think sounds weird. Ajit Pawar may fail, but Ajit Pawar is completely understandable. As somebody sent a WhatsApp to me, you got a person sitting there who's not quitting, the boss. You need your chance to move up, right, the ranks. And this happens in all these Indian parties. It's pretty well established that when you have dynastic organizations, right, which is what Indian parties are, you have only one option. Either you wait for the person to die. When the person dies, if you're not going to get it, which is apparent in this case, what are you going to do? You're going to split. Right? You will form a new political party. Whether it is successful or not remains to be determined. And if elections are a matter of numbers and game and money, he knows that if he joins the BJP, it's his best hope, right, of becoming a number one rather than remaining a number two for the rest of his life. Now, whether that's the trade-off he's making, I don't know. But I think from an outside perspective, that's a possible trade-off he's making.
So let me add another question, which is, and we've been talking about this, that it's hard to explain vote in India because we don't have a theory of vote, right? In comparison to US, where now there is well-established theory, or we know like what factors or variables play a role in shaping the vote outcome. So is the reason that we don't have a theory of vote because we are a young democracy, just like, 75 years old, and at some point, all the volatility in the electoral system, alliance shifting and other things will start settling down, and say 50 years down the line, we'll have a theory of vote. America might also not have a theory of vote when their electoral system and democracy started.
So this is, a friend of mine used to say, never know anybody for more than 6 months, because then they bring things back to you, things you've said earlier. So last time I was here, I said, we don't have a theory of the vote. So Rahul is now trying to, make my life difficult by bringing that thing back again, right? Why don't we have a theory of the votes? What's going on? I think I'm going to pick up on something Rajdeep said here again. And I think there's a reason we don't have a theory of the vote. I think there are things we can explain quite well. I'm going to retract what I said. I knew you'd be asking this question. So I thought about this a little bit. I think we have a pretty good theory of the vote right now, currently, at this point in time, will explain votes for some political parties, right? You can look at their cost patterns, you can explain voting. That's pretty straightforward. And I think we have a theory of vote for them. I think we don't have a theory of vote for a whole bunch of other people who I think are what I would call the people whose votes are swinging from election to election. And I think what we need to figure out is why are those people's votes swinging? So I think when the next election happens and we have two famous, television personalities here, they should be focusing less on, oh, the upper caste voted for this and oh, the Lingayats voted for this, but rather they should be focusing on, we've done that. We know that. What is happening with the group that was not part of these groups? Where are they going? The entire election, Karnataka election is dominated by Lingayats, Vokaligas and Kapus. And that's 30% of the population and everybody else is, Bindas or gone somewhere. I don't know where they are, right? So I think if you need to understand what you need to, as analysts, we need to not to build a theory of the vote. We don't focus on these existing caste groups because that's pretty predictable and quite frankly boring, right? So that's the one. The other thing I think is really difficult to have a theory of the vote is in America is a pretty, as far as politics goes, despite Donald Trump's shenanigans, it's pretty boring politics, right? At some level, there's two parties, right? This you vote for one or the other, they get stable parties. In India, the reason parties are not stable, and I think this is absolutely true, is because parties are also, there's money and there's serious amounts of money at stake when you come to political power. The serious amounts of money and resources. In fact, if you follow the ADR reports only, the surest way to become wealthy in India is to become a successful politician, right? Now, this is just facts, right? You can see how much assets they've accumulated compared to the price of gold, for instance, right? Pick your indicator of choice. That said, I think what we don't realize is that there are a whole bunch of people. These are the top guys. What about the guys who are 3 levels below? What are they doing? What are their prospects? Right? And unless we understand what they are doing and what their prospects are, and if they are in it as a career as well, they are the ones who are going to be switching back and forth, and we have no understanding of them and of what drives them, other than these very simplistic notions of these guys are middlemen and their job is to buy the vote. We have no career analysis of, okay, Pradeep started at the local level. What happened to him? How did he move himself up? And so if my concerns are that, which means if I'm the influencer, I'm moving back and forth because I'm seeing where the money is. I think we need a better handle of that. So until we have that, that's the other side of the theory. It will be difficult to build a theory of the party which is not rooted in money trade-off economics or things like that. And maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe there are people who are voting along caste lines and there are people who are just voting at the last minute. I read this great paper yesterday. For those who are interested, you should read it. I'm forgetting the name and the authors. But it just came out last year on, sorry. I can tell you what it is. I'll tell Rahul. I have it on my laptop, which I don't have. It's on vote buying in Andhra Pradesh in panchayat elections. And it's really interesting because they said they're giving money, but they're giving money not to buy a vote, but they're giving money as an insurance policy. So if I give money, at least I know you will not vote for the opposition. It's not a guarantee. But if you don't give money, your vote is gone. Right? So maybe that's all there is to it. Maybe at these swing voters, and we know that in India, there's a whole bunch of people who decide the election, who decide whom to vote for in the very last day and the day before. And they are the ones who are swinging the election. Not, Rajdeep's whose vote, I don't know what it is pretty predictable 6 months in advance. Right? Or me for that matter, right? I still have an Indian passport, right? My votes are pretty predictable. We have, they're not interesting people, right? So what's happening at the local level? So I start there.
Because I think Professor mentioned it at the outset. I think one of the more fascinating aspects which needs to be explored is why is it that the same voters voting differently in state and general elections? I mean, we saw it. We are now seeing it in far too many elections for it not to be seen as anything much like, the gender factor. I think that's the other big factor that needs to be looked at. This Madiga woman outside this Lingayat temple was very clear. She was going to vote for Siddaramaiah because a better Anya Bhagya scheme, because he gave LPG at 500 rupees. But ask her, who will you vote for Lok Sabha? Maybe Modi. not BJP, maybe Modi. Now, when a 58% vote in Haryana in 2019 general election, that's what the BJP got, swept all 10 seats, just 4 months later, sort of dwindles to 35%, 23% loss. It's a huge erosion in 4 months, and it's not as if the other side had, at least in Delhi, I can understand the difference because Kejriwal himself is a mini Modi. So, he can position himself for Delhi in the way Mr. Modi presents himself at the center. But why Haryana? Why should Haryana see in the space of 4 months such a major change? And we're seeing it state after state where Mr. Modi is not directly on the ticket. There is in Maharashtra, the story is at the moment that, you do a Vidhan Sabha election today, the Sharad Pawar, Uddhav Thackeray, Congress combined will probably sweep. But do a Lok Sabha election, and it will be probably the BJP in an even fight. Now, what explains that? Are we saying that the voter has now developed that level of, sophistication that he chooses so differently? And how do I make sense of it?
Yeah, but even there, I think, say, for example, in Delhi, it seems that BJP has a solid 35% vote. And then basically in Lok Sabha, it gets 55%. But in Vidhan Sabha, it reduces to 35 and Aam Aadmi Party gets that 15%. So the swing is actually taking place in just like a smaller segment, which is basically changing the outcome. It's not that everyone is making that distinction of national and state election. It's just a small subset of total voters who's swinging between two elections. But Rajdeep, just to end this conversation, and then I'll get some questions for you. I watch your elections on the plate program very, also to see where you're going to eat. So if I go there, I can eat. And you are also more interested in the food, it seems sometimes.
No, it's not that. Honestly, it's because viewers do not want to see politics. They want to see the food. You see, our sort of whatever surveys we've done, people like programs where you show them less politics today and politics, sadly, and show them more food places. But go ahead.
But so the question is this: like you speak to lots of voters, you travel. You also speak to lots of politicians in studio as well as phone and other things. You also have access to survey data. So people who want to study elections, some of them like young students would become journalists. What are the telltale signs you see in these three different groups? Because you also, I know that in India Today group, you also forecast your own set of results internally, right? And so how do you do,
I have a great faith in India's old stringer retainer network. My friends, stringer network friends in Karnataka told me 6 months ago the election was done. And to be fair to them, they were not influenced by the roadshow, not influenced. The further you are from Delhi, the more objective you tend to get, particularly about your home state. Delhi, you're caught in all the Darbari culture where everybody seems to have some connection to someone, and that seems to, and a lot of, as I said, therefore, biases and prejudices. I see it even in the YouTubers. Most of these YouTubers before 2019 said Modi's losing. Why? Because you wanted Modi to lose. And a lot of journalists seem to be so caught up in this hyper-polarized atmosphere at the moment that they're unwilling to see, as I said, the Labharti voter, for example, and the impact that he or she was having. So I think one of the things, if you're becoming a journalist, is, you can have very strong views. But I think elections provides you a great opportunity to keep those views apart for at least a few days and actually talk to people. And particularly the silent voter. Again, to give the example of this Madhika woman, because I'm using her as, it was like a eureka moment for me. I knew who was going to win Karnataka. Only because she didn't come to the camera. The camera went to her. A lot of BJP voters in particular, I'm saying, tend to come aggressively towards the camera. A lot of Dalit voters generally don't come before camera. I know this is a very broad generalization, but over the years, that's the sense I get. The sort of urban middle class, or even in the town, whoever are the sort of Bahubalis or whatever different states have different kinds of individuals who come up front to the camera. The more silent voices are the ones you need to capture. And unfortunately, television which used to have some great programming on that, more granular, more from the ground, does less of that because we are all carried away by leaders rather than voters. So I think that's one thing that I sense for journalists. You mentioned poll analysts. I think Pradeep Gupta and his Access team have done a great job because they moved away from random sampling almost to going to every constituency. And at times, and they've got it wrong at times. It's not as if anything is foolproof. And one of the reasons they got it wrong is Pradeep got gender wrong. Pradeep just didn't get the idea that in Bengal, and maybe because COVID was there, so he was, his team didn't go. It was a difficult time, but he just didn't get this, that Mamata Banerjee's schemes were working for women. And it was staring people in the face. I mean, Nitish Kumar also, frankly, a lot of his success is not so much driven only by, when it was working for him. I think it's now subject to diminishing returns. But when it was working, was largely because of women who were finding a leader at last in Bihar who was seen to be relatively softer. So I think poll analysts also, poll analysts seem to believe they have all the problem with polling at the moment is you've got a lot of fly-by-night operators. Many of these channels, I mean, one of the pollsters told me this time in Karnataka, I said, you told me something else in Bengaluru. I'm seeing you on air, you're saying something else. So channel owners have asked us to adjust. I mean, what the level of utter immorality that exists at times among all of us at various levels for various things was demonstrated. And you said a third category, journalists?
Politicians, like, are there telltale signs? Because on camera they speak in a very different language, but do you have
politicians getting that good, the old world politicians were a little bit more on the new age politicians, frankly, have gravitated from spokespersons to being netas. And therefore are completely much like journalists who sort of have remained editors all their lives and never done reporting. Seem to know it all, but actually know very little. The old world netas are much more willing to actually look at themselves in the mirror or their party in the mirror and talk. So I think it's always better to talk to the old world neta, to the stringer and retainers, and to credible pollsters. So if you can find a community of all these people together in one room, because I'll give the classic example and end with that. I remember in Bengal in 2021, Amit Shah. Amit Shah by then had already been anointed the Chanakya forever. So, he wasn't going to get an election wrong. So we're in this room and he says, tells a group of journalists that somebody asked him, sir, how many seats are you going to get? He said, minimum 200. So, and then he looks at me and says, Aapko kya lagta hai? मैंने कहा, sir, वो महिला वोटर तो ममता जी के साथ है. And because Pradeep, I think, who was polling for him, and his poll didn't seem to say, "Aap galat hain, और हम बड़ी जीत के लिए जा रहे हैं, and आप इसको लिख के लड़ रही है." I said, "Sir, I wish it was on camera actually. आप लिख के रहिए, मैं राजनीतिक करियर मेरा छोड़ दूंगा अगर हम 200 के कम आए." So I thought of sort of if I had recorded it, I'd have gone to Mr. Shah and said, "You're still the home minister of the country. But you said 200. Look, politicians exaggerate, and and we, unfortunately, in the media now amplify their voices without questioning or interrogating them. I think that's part of the problem. We just do not interrogate them enough, and get swayed by and use these epithets. You're a Chanakya. You're a grandmaster. Sharad Pawar is whatever. Master strategist. I mean, he didn't know how many people were melting away from him when most journalists knew they were melting away. So politicians tend to live now more and more in their echo chambers, like most of us do actually. And that's one of the things I think that we get wrong in election outcomes. Far too many of us are living in our echo chambers, whether it's in WhatsApp groups, where we only want people who will confirm what we think about a particular individual, rather than talking to each other and rather than having dialogues. We're just sort of talking in our own little echo chambers. I think that's the problem. Break out of the echo chamber.
Thank you, Rajdeep. Let me take 3 or 4 questions from the room, and then I'll take some from the. So, since we talked about women vote, I would prefer to start with some. Yeah. So we'll take those 3, 4, and then we take them. Yes, please. Yes.
When are we supposed to be?
Just in 10 15.
That's it. Very short here.
So you talked about
Do you have a name, please?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Shrishti and I'm working in the climate team at CPR. So you talked about the age. Oh, sorry. You talked about the gender and you talked about the caste. But what influence do you think the vote swing has with the age of the voter?
Second question, someone at the back and then research. Vanita and Priyanka, you take the call. Who gets the mic?
Yeah, hi, my name's Arnesh Kapoor. I'm studying international relations at the University of Edinburgh. My question is for Professor Chibber. As an academic, how do you view the phenomena of the presidentialization of the Prime Minister's office, which was briefly touched upon in this conversation? And how big of a threat do you view the presidentialization of the Prime Minister's office, considering now cabinet meetings are becoming more of a rubber-stamped institutions rather than actual democratic decision-making forums? Thank you.
I'm Ranjit Bhushan. I'm a journalist. I wanted to ask Rajdeep, what makes Modi the most successful Indian politician ever? He has won everything. He has won assembly. He has won Lok Sabha. I don't think you can say that about anybody else, including the Nehru guy. Thank you.
Can you pass it?
So my question is to, okay, sorry. My name is Dharmanshu. My question is directed to Rajdeep Sir Desai. So since we have talked about this hyper polarized media, so this question comes largely from an observation, which is that the leaders have understood that since the media is hyper polarized, so they have now shifted to podcasts going for YouTubers, which are generally perceived as non-apolitical or non-partisan. So how do you explain this and what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's the last question. And then,
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm Leela Caleb Varki, and my question is really to try and get in the voters' perspective a little bit. How much do party manifestos matter?
So any of you can start.
You want to look at the Modi phenomenon? I'll quickly give my view.
Why did you do that?
Yeah, Ranjit, you mentioned that. Look, we look at Narendra Modi only now in the last 8 years. The fact is, he's been in politics in some form or the other for 40, 45 years, and he's done virtually everything that a sort of grassroots level politician in a way would do. Grassroots, not in the term of being a panchayat leader himself, but his ability to be a pracharak, then state secretary, then general secretary. He worked through the organization. And when you have that rich experience, he's bullshitting when he says he went across, he's been to every, all the 543 constituencies of the country and spent at least one night somewhere, which he claimed in the years that he was, in the Himalayas or wherever. But the fact is he's invested a lot of his capital in experience from the ground. And you can't beat that. You just can't beat that. You cannot, and this is the problem, which I mentioned earlier, you cannot be a drawing room politician in Delhi and touch and be able to compete with that. The ability to know when to say what, when to stay out. I won't speak on Manipur because it's out of my comfort zone. It will unnecessarily put me into a controversy. I will not speak. I will know when to use, and allied to that is, which I think is his great skill, and it's not a skill which he learned in Harvard or anywhere else, is the ability to use the media. And he had it not just now. I mentioned it in my 2014 book. I will never forget his ability while tracking the Rath Yatra of 1990 to organize these fax machines at a time when, most political parties were still sort of struggling to understand what technology was about. He was there with his digital diary, and he would make sure that journalists were, constantly being fed information. This was a young Narendra Modi as state secretary. Then when the media explosion takes place, he was just made for it. So I think And I think one of the things we will need to look at some stage, and maybe an academic, is what is the impact this multimedia machine has on voting preferences, how you look. Just contrast that Mahagathbandhan meeting press conference in Patna. They were all straggling in, Lalu tying his nada kind of thing, versus Modi, who will not make one mistake in the way he looks on air. Hair perfectly combed, right angle, where the tear has to come when Vajpayee is dead. It's a performance. He is the ultimate performer, the ultimate event manager. If he loses an election and CPR needs someone else for marketing, please get him. He will transform you. And he is that. And he's that. And I've seen it for 30 years. To be fair to him, I've seen the manner in which he knew how to use the media long before. Pramod Mahajan was the other BJP leader, possibly cut of the same cloth, but didn't have a home state and was a Brahmin. Modi was OBC. Something that he discovered also later. I mean, when he was in his Gujarat days, he would never play the OBC card. The OBC card has been played in the last decade as he moved to Uttar Pradesh. But again, very, very astute. And when you 40, 50 years on the ground, you can't beat that experience.
And if I'm just is he likely to be surprised this time? What do you think?
No, I think it would. You never know with the voter, but I mean, he is the front runner. He's the obvious front runner. The only thing is we don't know the depth of, as I said, the depth of economic distress in some parts of the country at the moment, post-COVID. And there were signs, Karnataka is an anti-incumbency state, you could argue, but I sense it even in, Maharashtra, which I travel more through. There is deeper economic distress than our politicians will believe. And sometimes when you are in the Prime Minister's office, you can get caught in your own echo chamber. He's clever enough not to do so, though. And you're already seeing it. In the next 6 months, he will do Garib, Kalyan everywhere. Garib and gender. Pradeep?
Yes. So there were two questions which I don't know if I should, three questions, one on aging and vote swing by Shrishti. I don't know if Rahul would know this better. I've not been thinking about Indian elections for a while. And Rahul, you are now going to get into trouble, so I should just warn you.
Sure.
You may know the answer to this. No, let me say sure. There are two other questions. The first question is on the presidentialization of the Prime Minister's office and how much of a threat is it by Kapoor. But I think, and I'm going to this question and the next one on which was asked about how much do party manifestos matter. And I think both these questions I'm going to punt to Rahul because he's written a paper on the first one. Right, which talks, and quite frankly, the Indian constitution is structured in a way that the office of the Prime Minister has enormous power, even there's only one line in the constitution mentioning the Prime Minister. And I think Rahul has written a paper on this, on how the Indian institutions are structured in a way that gives the Prime Minister enormous power. Right, and that's something I think that's, so the question is, the institutions are set up in a way that this person can do pretty much what they choose to do if they want to do it. So that's the first thing. I think, and as far as media manifestos, the party manifestos go, Rahul has actually been collecting this manifesto and has written on this. So Rahul, do you want to answer both the questions on
this spot?
That's the right thing to do.
On the manifestos, that we have a report which is available on the CPR website. What we have done since 1952 for 3 political parties, BJP, Congress, and Left. We collected those manifestos and basically we have analyzed them, what issues matters for political parties. Now, the harder question is, do political parties actually take those manifestos seriously? And do voters take those manifestos seriously? And I don't have a good answer to this because some political parties appoint very senior leaders in the manifesto committee. But when I approached some of these leaders for interview, one of them said, "Yeah, tum academic in such cheezon ko seriously lete." So I don't know. And that person was actually part of manifesto committee of that particular political party for last 2 elections.
But you can also add that one of these 3 political parties said, I can't find a manifesto for the previous years while I'm putting together the manifestos. Can you give it to me if you have it?
But do the guarantees work? For example, now you're moving away from manifestos to this clear guarantee offer, as was done in Karnataka, as was done in Himachal Pradesh.
Tamil also started, but I basically look at the victors, right? BJP also made similar kind of guarantees. Guarantees are not going to work alone. Rahul Gandhi also guaranteed many things in the run-up to 2019 election, right? At the end of the day, elections have, in my opinion, 5 components: organization, leadership, some kind of your ideological narrative, and then performance either as an incumbent or as an opposition, and then the social coalition. If you don't get something on these 5 things, you are not going to win elections, right? So you may guarantee the moon, but if you don't have the leader, so you need the messenger, right? Also to be able to deliver the message. On the age, I think, so there is like, we don't have a lot of idea on how Indians vote by age, but at least what we know about 2014, 2019, young voters voted for BJP a lot more. They were enamored by Prime Minister Modi. So their like preference for Modi was very, very high, which now in recent surveys suggest that it has declined slightly. And so that adds to Rajdeep's point that economic anxiety is much more among these younger voters between the 18 to 34 category. And that I wrote a piece for HT that this could be BJP's Achilles heel. This is not to say they will lose or anything. They still lead among younger voters by a large margin, but this is a group which is basically anxious of its future opportunities and other things.
And which might link what your YouTube question was of asking YouTubers with the question of age. I mean, I think it's fascinating. And this gives you a sense of how the BJP responds, unlike the BJP has this remarkable feedback system, and where they are getting this feedback that younger voters or need to be talked to differently. They're not watching a 9 p.m. news, or they're not, they want to watch YouTubers freed of sort of, this political polarization. They don't want to go into manifestos in depth, but we are ready to, to get ministers, therefore, to speak to them. In the Congress, honestly, I doubt that would happen. Rahul Gandhi, suddenly has decided I'm going to speak to YouTubers, but you're eliminating mainstream media. That doesn't work either. You've got to, they are at the moment, it's run like a corporate enterprise. At the, the way the BJP is doing it, using call centers, using feedback mechanisms, using poll. I mean, they've got no endless resources. If I've got endless resources, I can poll every week and get tracker polls done every week, and I know where I'm going down. But think about it. There are 160 constituencies where the BJP was 2nd or 3rd last time. They've got their union ministers who are only being told you have to focus on that, and they have to give a daily, weekly report. Why do you think a minister in this government never looks happy? Because he's working all the time. Not working on governance necessarily, but working on election. I was sitting next to one of these ministers a couple of weeks ago, and I was wondering whether he was going for some, because the other big thing the ministers seem to be doing at the moment is addressing some G20 meet in some corner of India. But he said, I am being sent to Kolhapur because I and an MP have been told that you have to be there for the next year to ensure that the BJP, what can the BJP do to win Kolhapur away from the NCP? Or now I think that seat had gone to the Shiv Sena. But the fact is that seats where they've lost out, they're focusing on those. Now, I haven't seen this happen in Indian politics before. This level of micromanagement is of a, some of it is also, their own, they are also great spinners, politicians, they'll tell you, we've got these Panna Pramukhs who are looking at 30 names. That can be replicated. That everyone, now every party is doing that. WhatsApp groups, Panna Pramukhs. But the level of just the sheer focus that they put, I don't think is matched in Indian politics, which is why in most elections there will be front runners. Because they are, they unless there's an anti-incumbency vote like there was in Karnataka, you need a strong anti-incumbency vote. And in 2024, Mr. Modi has to commit a big mistake between now and March for him to lose. That's my view. I haven't still, it's not going to win. He's not going to win because the opposition has to realize you will not win an election only through arithmetic. You need chemistry. There is no chemistry that I see in the opposition at the moment that gives a younger voter also a sense. Indian voters are looking for stability. They are looking for a sense of security. And like it or not, Mr. Modi at the moment does tend to provide.
Thank you, everyone. I sincerely apologize. I couldn't take all the questions that you might have, even on Zoom, but many of these questions were answered during the conversation by Pradeep and Rajdeep. So on behalf of Center for Policy Research, thank you everyone for turning up here in the run-up to our 50th year celebration, which is very, very exciting year for us. We'll continue to bring many more things, including this series on how India votes. So this is the 24-part series. Every month we are going to have 3 conversations. And the idea is that by the time April 2024 comes, we have a slight more understanding of elections and voting behavior. So if you have suggestions and questions, please do write to us so that we can also plan ahead. Our next event is on July 18th, which is going to be on what data can so Jeev, who's sitting here, and Sanjay Kumar, CSDS, these 2 people would be coming here, and both of them have been working with data on elections, and so they will talk about what data can tell us about Indian elections. So thank you everyone for coming here, and everyone who joined on Zoom and stayed for the full conversation. Thank you, Rajdeep, and thank you, Pradeep. Thank you.